Hi, welcome back. I'm the Book Guy. Today we're discussing indie authors. We're looking at 3 self-published authors who have just written terrific debut books. Now, I often talk about indie books on this channel, but every time I do, the video gets hardly any views. Personally, I don't care about views very much, but the whole point of doing these videos is to get eyes on the authors. So to help with that, we're going to make this video a quick one, making it short, concise, direct, efficient, to the point, without saying the same thing multiple times in multiple ways. We're off to a rough start. Anyway, I'm excited to talk about these 3 new authors because they've all got a couple of things in common. That's why I've grouped them together. First, they're all debut authors who have just published their first book. Second, all 3 are planning a trilogy or a quadrilogy, so this is part of an ongoing story. And third, all of these books are right on the line between adult and young adult fantasy. You could classify them either way depending on your preferred marketing angle, so that's why I'm including them as a bonus video in our monthly theme of January of looking at young adult books. So here are your 3 options today. First, we have The Sharp Edge of Fate, an assassin fantasy set in a flintlock fantasy with guns, trains, cars, and magic. The story is about Piper, the belladonna assassin who has to team up with her intended victim in order to solve the mystery of who hired her and why. Also, the second book in this trilogy just came out. We're discussing both of them today. Next, we have A Journey Thrice Begun. This one's really hard to classify because it's a clever subversion of many fantasy tropes and a truly original story. So it features a cast of characters in a small town. Everett is offered a chance to go to magic school and become a great mighty wizard, but he says no. He chooses to stay in his small fantasy hometown and try to live a quieter life, except the world may not let him. And third, we have Fire from Ashes. A child soldier who was forced into conscription now deserts the army and goes on the run from his own empire. This heavy book explores a war-torn country and the effects that war has on children. Plus, it has dragons. There's a man versus nature element to it as well, so it's similar themes to Avatar or Princess Mononoke. So those are your 3 options today. My goal is to convince you to try at least one of them. Support a new author at the most difficult point in their career, the beginning. There are timestamps on this video if you want to go straight to one of the 3 books that interest you the most. Otherwise, let's begin with our first entry. All of Silversdale is terrified of the belladonna assassin. This deadly viper strikes at night, poisons their victims, and leaves a belladonna flower in the pocket as a calling card. Hence, the belladonna flower on the cover. The real belladonna is a young woman, Piper. She's actually under the thumb of a brutal crime lord who raised her from birth to do his evil bidding. And Piper obeys him because she has 2 young children in her care who she must protect. Her exact relationship to these 2 kids is unclear, but she does all of her killing to earn money to feed them and send them to school. Her 2 lives begin to unravel when a hit goes bad. Piper is hired to assassinate the magician who guards the royal family. But mages are bloody hard to kill. That's how the mage Alec is able to survive and find Piper's true identity. Alec demands her help. He thinks the threat on his life means a threat to the royal family. Piper has to work with this mage to find the danger to the crown, unless she finds an opportunity to just finish the job instead. Now, I met this author, T.F. Johnson, in person at a book event, and she was telling me about her book with an assassin, and I interrupted and said, hang on, does this assassin actually assassinate anyone? And she said, yes, in chapter 1. And I said, thank you, please tell me more. As you might have guessed, this book does have a pretty similar style to the works of Sarah J. Maas, although in many ways better. Our protagonist Piper is very much a killer who has no problems getting violent when she needs to, but she also has a conscience and is a very sympathetic character, especially given her situation being between a crime lord and 2 innocent children. That said, she is a hurt and broken person who doesn't trust easily and lashes out when people try to help her. So I think some readers will find her frustrating, but I also think she's a good example of how people act when they have trauma. The world building is curious. The author has very clearly tried to not overwhelm the reader with a bunch of world-building information at the beginning, and instead holds off on it to focus on the story. And yet in the latter half of the book, we suddenly got all this world-building at once. And it was awesome. I mean, the world of Rialgo is quite fascinating. That is, once we actually see it. I confess, I actually angry messaged the author and told her not to hide all the cool fantasy stuff next time. Show yourself! But yes, it's sort of Victorian era, post-industrial revolution, flintlock fantasy sort of thing. There's also some cool monsters, and a magic system of speaking spells and conducting ancient rituals, etc. We have extinct races and hints of an old world before the humans became the dominant species, so there's a lot going on. The world building also expands a lot in the second book. This one changes the formula a little and becomes an epic quest across the world. So we travel and allows us to explore and see new places and cultures. Again, Rialgo is pretty interesting. One defining detail about the series, it's just not very dark. It's PG. Despite the whole assassin thing, it's almost never violent. There's no swearing. In fact, the character often says non-swear words like fudge, which I'm not a fan of. I mean, the author is Australian. She should be swearing constantly. Wizard should know better. Plus, the situation with Piper and her crime lord is hinted at being an abusive relationship, but again, it doesn't really get very dark. So decide for yourself. I think some of you will be disappointed that it's almost kid-friendly, and others will be relieved to finally read fantasy that's just very clean, so that's a matter of personal taste. Plotlines: Book 1 sees Piper and Alec, the Royal Mage, team up to solve a crime mystery. Book 2 is an epic quest across the world to rescue someone. In both books, the plot moves quickly and changes things up, introduces new threats and challenges, keeping it interesting. Though you may assume, like I did, that this would be a romance series, it's really not. Piper and Alec certainly are reluctant allies, something we see a lot in romance, and they have a developing relationship and struggle to trust each other. But the story is like 5% a hint of possible romance, but it's just not that strong of a romance presence. There are some weaknesses in the series I have to mention even as I pitch it to you. A lot of the characters in this are the same. So Piper and Alec are really intriguing, but everyone else sadly feels like a one-note character. Especially the two kids. They are just like generic kids. Yippee! I was hoping the second book would develop on this area, but I don't really think it did. Another weakness, probably the big one in my eyes, both books have a mystery plotline that I feel was just not resolved in a very satisfying way. I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but basically the bad guys just reveal themselves. So the heroes don't have to solve the mystery. Nor is there a red herring, oh, we think it's Steve, aha, it's actually Bob. No, the bad guys are just like, it's me. And as a reader, I'm like, okay, I guess I know that now. I didn't feel like the mystery really delivered enough of a plot twist to make an impact on me. Another weakness, there were quite a few lines in the book where the meaning just wasn't clear, where I had to read it twice because I'm like, I don't actually understand what just happened here. That stuff doesn't bother me too much, but I should mention it to you. And there's one more weakness, sorry, Ms. Johnson. The characters don't save themselves enough. They often get rescued by others or by luck, and it happens just a few too many times and the main characters just start looking incompetent. That was a bit frustrating. Okay, that's it. Sorry to end on the weaknesses, that's not great, but yeah, we've got 2 books so far in Rialgo. The author is planning to release a 3rd book later this year in 2025. Also, this is just the beginning of the Rialgo world. The creator has plans for many more books in this universe. If you want to check out the series, you can see the link to the author's website in the description below, where you can grab her books. And one final shout out, how beautiful are the covers? Like I didn't say before, but just how incredible this cover design is. It actually won an award as it deserves to, so full points there. Okay, let's move on to our second author of the day. Everett is excited for Charing Night. It's a big annual festival, and the one night a year where the people of Delwood can make marriage proposals. Anyone in the town who wants to can come forward and have the chance, and Everett is ready this year to propose to his childhood sweetheart. Yet on this momentous day, a strange woman comes to town. She's a magician and an old friend of Everett's mother. As a favor to her, this magician offers Everett a chance to learn magic and become a mighty wizard, and he says no. He doesn't want to be great and powerful. Everett has much smaller dreams. Delwood is his home, and it's all he's ever wanted. And yet, fate may have other plans for this hero who rejected his journey. A magical darkness is spreading all across Gyra, and Everett's small corner of the world may not stay safe for long. So I enjoyed literally everything about this book. From page 1, the writing prose is just gorgeous. There's beautiful language every step of the way. This author spent nearly 3 years on this book getting it just right, and the attention to detail really shows. A big strength is character writing. So there's a substantial cast of characters in this small town, and we spent a lot of time getting to know them, and yet I never had trouble telling them apart. They had distinct names, personalities, dialogue. It was great. This actually reminded me of old school Stephen King. He used to do books that would have a small town and a whole village worth of characters. Like in It or in Salem's Lot, where it actually felt like you lived there and you knew all these people to some degree. Well, Sean Bobby Kerr absolutely nails the feeling of a small town from a character perspective, and it's very impressive. Our main character Everett is very likable. He's smart and competent, he solves mysteries and figures things out, though in many ways he's quite a quiet, reserved person about his own thoughts and feelings. He likes to listen and consider. So there were times I didn't really know what he was feeling, but I think it's because he's mysterious in that sense. This book is also quite large, at 626 pages. Now this can be a risky move. Normally, new authors should try to start small, because it's easier to convince people to read a short book. People may not trust you with a large book very early in your career. There are, yes, some gifted authors who go straight to bigger books, like Robert Jordan, Patrick Rothfuss, but they really are the exception. So it's ambitious to start big, but this book makes up for it with really fantastic pacing. This plot just keeps powering forward. Things were always moving. I was always intrigued by something new over every horizon. So it's a long book, but it felt like a quick one. The plot itself focuses on a lot of mysteries around the town of Delwood and hints of what's happening in the wider world. Some refugees come to town, all of them blind and unwilling to speak of what happened to them. There's a sort of church organization, a bit like the White Cloaks from Wheel of Time, whose zeal for the law is an encroaching danger to the town. But there's smaller activities in the town itself, like a water ball contest with their neighboring village, and a rich young girl who comes to town to learn piano from a great master, and Everett's proposal. So there's a clever juxtaposition between the light-hearted everyday adventures of life compared to the looming dangers of the wider fantasy world. Like I said, this book is very original and avoids a lot of common fantasy tropes. That said, I do have just one weakness to discuss. So the book avoids a lot of fantasy tropes, which is great, but it also means as a reader, I had no idea where this book was going. I wasn't sure what the goal was. That's the thing about tropes. Yes, they're familiar, but they also are guidelines. If you remove them, you're not really sure what direction you're going in. Now yes, by the time I finished this book, I realized what direction it had been heading in the whole time, and I understood what the goals were, but for a lot of the middle of the book I did feel a bit lost. Also worth noting, there is a large captivity plotline. Now I've gone on record saying how much I hate captivity plotlines because they so often just make the reader sit around and wait. But this captivity plotline was pretty good. It had several mysteries to be solved and a clear goal of trying to find a way to escape. Also, it just moved quickly. The captivity was a bit darker than the rest of the book in theme, but I'd also say this captivity plotline for the most part worked and avoided slowing the story too much. One final disclaimer, Sean Bobby Kerr is actually one of my patrons. Feel as a matter of integrity I've got to tell you this, but this is still a genuine recommendation of his book. It's not a paid endorsement. In fact, he didn't even tell me about his books, which was very rude. We were chatting online about The Will of the Many and the Greenbone saga, and he mentioned, how it was improving his own writing, and I'm like, whoa. What's this about your own writing? He's like, nothing. It's just something I've been working on, it's coming out. And I'm like, give me your book now. So that's how the conversation went. Anyway, if you like the sound of that one, check out the link below to his website to grab a copy of his book. The website is Enter Gyra, because Gyra is the name of the world introduced here. Now on to the final debut author, Jessica Barberi. I should also mention, for integrity's sake, Jessica is also one of my patrons. And once again, this is an unsponsored, genuine recommendation of her book. For whatever reason, the people who support me on Patreon just happen to be really smart and really talented. I don't know what to tell you.
Coincidence? I think not!
Alright, let's take a look at her book. Kieran has deserted from the Imperial Army after witnessing one atrocity too many. He knows the war is just non-stop horror. He knows his own empire is corrupt. So he flees into the mountains, hoping to just escape his fellow soldiers a little bit longer. There he encounters a dragon. Now the dragons are the great enemy of the empire, and part of that country they've been at war with for years. Yet this encounter will further challenge everything Kieran believes. Kieran must question what he knows. Is there ever a way to be free from the war? Can he run forever, or will he have to stand and fight? There's a lot that's great about this book. First thing I noticed is the beautiful visual nature of the writing. From line 1, Jessica has crafted every sentence so carefully. I could really feel, hear, see, sense, smell everything that was happening in the story. So evocative. I loved our protagonist Kieran. He grows through this story in very nuanced, gradual but natural ways. In fact, Kieran is a lot like Finn from Star Wars, but if Finn actually had a character arc that dealt with the morality of war and unlearning the Empire's propaganda. If you're like me, you might find Kieran's arc quite cathartic.
It really means a lot to you, huh?
So this is also quite a short book at just 300 pages, so the plot is very quick, to the point, doesn't mess around. Kieran's journey is all about trying to avoid the Empire while surviving off the wilderness, or occasionally risking a visit to a human settlement for supplies. There is genuine dread and danger every time he risks interacting with others. I also love the world building. Jessica has perfectly nailed a culture of fanaticism and patriotism, and what it looks like for a country to be in a state of total war. Sometimes we meet soldiers who are so devoted to the Empire, and they're just painfully brainwashed. We see people who have been lied to so many times and they just cannot accept reality. The Empire has many edicts that are straight out of history, such as all farmers must farm the same way, even if it doesn't work and causes a famine. There are secret police who hunt down those who speak an ill word about their leaders. The historical parallels here are very well done. As for the whole, dragon on the front cover, I actually can't say much without spoilers here, but this is not the same story we've seen plenty of times before, where a boy becomes best friends with a dragon. The relationship here is risky. Dragons are not exactly the good guys to the Empire's bad guys. Dragons are chaotic. They're wild animals and are often unpredictable. I like that it's not a very clear moral divide between good and evil, but a much more mature take on war and morality. Now, there's one detail that's not a weakness, but it might put off a few readers. The series can be surprisingly dark and violent. We see children die as victims of war very early on. Now, it makes the whole book very tense because there's real risk and cost to every violent encounter. People actually die here, but heads up on the content there. There are a few weaknesses I have to discuss, but nothing too severe. One is that the main character, Kieran, gets rescued a lot instead of saving himself, so there's a bit of plot armor there. The book is also split into 3 parts, and I did feel as though the third and final part was a little bit directionless. It ended up working really well in the end, and in many ways had some of my favorite scenes in the whole book, but I was a little bit lost while going through it. The goal just needed to be a bit clearer, that's all. And if there's a third weakness, kinda, it's that the book is a little bit too open at the end. That's more of a personal preference thing, I think. This author has actually been writing all the books simultaneously, so I suspect that's how they're meant to be read. Also, I'm a bit mad because I only just realized while working on the script that the author has already released books 2 and 3, and the 4th and final book comes out next month in March. How did I not know this? And honestly, now I'm wondering if I shouldn't have just waited to read all 4 and then give this series its own video because of how good it is, but maybe we'll revisit this one sometime. But anyway, if you're interested in this series, check out the author's website in the description and explore the entire Fires of the Empire saga. You can read all the books and then tell me about it. I hope you'll check it out. Okay, so those are our 3 debut indie authors. Let me know which one appeals to you the most and why. I hope you'll check out at least one of them, support a new artist and a small business. I'll be back later this week to discuss the Illuminae files finally. It'll be the last video in our young adult monthly theme before we move on to Malazan for a few weeks. Should be good. If you want to support me, you can check out my shop or my Patreon or my own indie books, The Immortal Investigations. But that's all for me. I'll be back soon. Meanwhile, I hope you enjoy a good book today. Bye!